Hello and welcome to the Training and Tangents podcast with your hosts, myself, Tom, and my lovely co-host, Ben.
Hello, Tom. How are you feeling?
Hello. Yeah, still pretty rough to be honest.
So just before
Um,
we started recording, Tom said I'm not allowed to make him laugh throughout this entire episode because Tom's been a bit sick, as have I. So we were supposed to record this last week, but we decided, yeah, let's wait until we can both string a sentence together without sniffing or coughing. But it seems like the
yeah,
cough has still got you. So if you hear Tom make an attempt at laughing, that's what that noise is. And you said you're gonna have to change it slightly, didn't you?
yeah. Well,
Type
I don't know what I'm going to do. We just have to see how we go. But
I'm looking forward to
yeah,
it. I'm looking forward to it.
I think I'll either have to laugh like really quietly or do a really forced laugh, or just end up spluttering and coughing. We'll just see how it goes.
Fair enough. All right.
The
What are we talking about
today's
today?
podcast is about what really matters when it comes to nutrition. But before we kick on with everything there, is there anything new with you, Ben? Anything you wanna tell people about?
My tangents this week. A few. Well, obviously I've been sick. I have been sick for the last 2 weeks. You can maybe still hear it in my face, nasal cavity there. But I took the last 2 weeks off, and it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. It's feeling like when they don't go to the gym, they're sliding backwards when it comes to progress, which is nonsense. Like if you've been training as consistently and as long as we have, you can take time off. Grand scheme of things, a week after 20 plus years of training is a drop in the ocean. But psychologically, it's still. I just feel better having moved my body. What about you?
Yeah, yeah, 100%, mate. Yeah, I completely agree. I think everyone is always really hesitant to have time off and really keen to get back to it, and sometimes kind of like I find people do force that. And I think that like the nicest way to frame it is like you know yourself intuitively if you're going into the gym, if by training you're going to put yourself in a bit of a hole, that's going to make you worse, or whether you like, because obviously you can still go in and train if you got a bit of a cold and you know you can do something and it's not going to impact you and it's not going to impact your recovery and you're going to get better. That's cool. And I think like if you're sort of on the fence, you know quite quickly once you start doing something whether it's a good idea or not.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, don't be stubborn and push on, because at the end of the day you're just going to end up putting yourself backwards. And if it is like, as though just like sleep deprivation, or you're feeling a little bit run down or that sort of thing, quite often you can just tweak a session, like rather than doing some really hard fitness, for example, like maybe just do like an easy upper body session, which is probably going to be slightly easier to recover from. So I think it's definitely worth listening to your body. But yeah, exactly the same as you, mate. I've not trained for 2 weeks. This is the most rough I felt for. I think it's like probably ever.
Yeah, we
I've
were
like
texting each other, being like, "What is happening to us? Why are we
yeah.
both so sick?" I'm the same as you. I get sick for 2 days usually, and then I'm like, "Okay, fine now. Sniffles have gone. I've slept properly. I can breathe through both nostrils." But this is just dragged and dragged and dragged, and I think I'm out of the tail end of it now. But fingers crossed, you are too. But I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
talking
no,
about this. Looking forward to talking about this topic because this is nutrition is, in my opinion, one of the most complex, nuanced, and difficult things to kind of wrap your head around if you are looking to improve nutrition. Training, I think, is for the most part the easier side of this. I think nutrition is definitely a complex issue. So hopefully today we're gonna give everyone some really good information as to how to approach nutrition and make it less stressful and avoid putting yourself in what I call like unnecessary food prisons, which a lot of people tend to do. So, shall we kick it
100%.
off with point number one?
Let's get let's get started, mate. You go ahead. Go point number one.
Okay, so the first one we were looking at is the morality or the idea that there's good and bad foods. We, as humans, love to label things. It makes things seem less chaotic in a world that is purely chaos. And this is one of the things we've done. We've labeled foods good and bad. Now, I guarantee if you're listening to this, you can think of very easily 5 good foods and 5 bad foods. But thinking of it like that, thinking of food as a black and white style approach is a really bad way of looking at things. It's very restrictive. The better way of looking at this, and this is what I always tell my clients, is There's foods that are suitable for you currently and less suitable. Not suitable, but less suitable. Things that are triggering, things that you find are, very, very easy for you to consume. Yeah, morality of foods is a mindset that I don't think really serves people. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I completely agree. It makes it very black and white. And also, it's like if you're labeling something as bad, it forces people to people then feel guilty when they're consuming it because at the end of the day, like you're never not going to consume like something forever. And it's definitely okay to include like, a bit of everything within your diet as long as you're ticking off the main things, which we're going to come on to next. Um, and yeah, I think it's one of those things that if you say to someone, "Don't do this thing" or "Don't eat this thing," it's like, what's the first thing they're going to want to eat is that thing. And I
Yeah,
think the way I kind of sort of frame this with clients is giving yourself complete permission to eat whatever you want, but also with so nothing is ever like truly off the table. Like if you really want to have something, go and have it. Enjoy it. Don't feel guilty about it, but like fit that into everything else, and you potentially will
exactly.
alter like other choices that you make for the through the rest of that week to allow for certain things. And I think it's like knowing that you can always have something, it kind of makes you want it less a lot of the time because you're like, oh, I could have that thing, but actually right now I'm not that first. I'm focused on working towards this goal. I want to do this thing. I'm actually like the only reason you're craving it is because you feel like you can't have it. um so yeah, I think there's definitely like yeah, not looking at things from a black and white perspective like that is definitely a good way to go about it. But also like I think it's really interesting how that's kind of come about, and I think it's it's really hard when you look at like education around food because when people are first introduced to like nutrition, like even Zach, who's my 4-year-old, they did a little bit about nutrition at nursery, and that's the first thing that they come to is like this is a good food, this is a bad food. So it's so ingrained and it's so hard to get away from that because when you sort of try and dumb things right the way down and make it as simple as possible, it's like that's
You're
going to be probably
gone.
your first port of call. So it's really I think it's really fascinating like how that's kind of come about, and it makes complete sense. But also um, looking at kind of furthering your education around that and looking at moving away from that. And yeah, I think it's quite an interesting thing to consider how we go about doing that. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I always say the danger is in the dosage with anything. Like if too much of anything is bad. I mean, there's that story of the woman who passed away unfortunately from drinking too much water. Now we're a water-based species. Like that, you think, oh well, everyone will go. If you said, well, is water good or bad? People go, well, it's good. Clearly, I'm like, yeah, but too much of it is bad. Similarly, that there's that dude who turned what is it purple or something because he was eating too many of the I think it was carrots or something. But he like
Too much
again
beetroot, probably.
beetroot. That's what it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
like again, too much of that is bad for you. So I think the danger's in the dosage. But the way I like to approach it with people is right. What we need to do is we need to find out what your body needs in terms of the nutrients, in terms of the energy for your goals. So we need to work out how much protein do you need, how much calories do you need, how much fiber do you need. Again, trying to structure most of those decisions around whole foods. And when I say whole foods, it's foods that have pretty much a single ingredient. Chicken is just chicken, pasta is just pasta, so on and so forth. But then once we found what our body needs, then we go, okay, well, what do you want? Because that's ultimately what it comes down to. Think of it when you're a kid, like, your boys. If you offered them the option between, some chicken or some sweets, they're probably going to lean towards sweets because that's what they want. But their body needs is obviously the chicken. So we grow up, I love talking about this with my clients. It's the idea that we grow up having a parent above us, usually, or a guardian, who's telling us, you need to eat this, you need to do this, you need to eat your greens, you need to eat all your food in your plate, all those things that we're told. But then once you leave that parental guidance and you start going off on your own, now you're faced with the dilemma of, well, there's no one telling me what to do. I can eat whatever I want. And I still remember that. I remember moving out of my parents' house and I was like, I can eat cereal like for every single meal. This is incredible. I'm going to eat cereal for every single meal. Obviously, not the best way of fueling yourself, but there's no one telling me not to do it. And I think that's one of the struggles. It's knowing, okay, this is what I need. Once I've checked that off, then it's a case of, okay, what do I want though? What's going to make me feel like I'm not dieting? What's going to make my life feel like I'm less? Nutrition can be quite punishing the way some people approach it, and I think that's the goal of, right. Okay, and the other thing to say is how much people can get away with as well when it comes to that balance of what they need and what they want. It's going to be different from person to person. I had a client saying the other day, "Oh, I'm Monday to Friday, really, really good. I've got my structure. I know what I'm doing. It's the weekends that kind of fall apart for me." I was like, "Okay, well, tell me about your weekends a little bit more. Like, what does it look like?" And he goes, "Well, my breakfast is usually fairly similar to what I have during the week." And I'm like, "Okay," and lunches are pretty similar. Like maybe the odd occasion I'll go out for food, but even then, I'm picking like decent food. So when we looked at it, I was like, "So you're saying that Monday through Friday you're good, but Saturday, Sunday you don't feel like you're as good when it comes to, again, using the term good, I'm air quoting again on a podcast." But we looked at it in a bit more detail, and he was like, "Oh, actually, this is a good balance in terms of I don't have to be super structured like I am during the week, but that works for him during the week. But the foods I'm choosing, because again, as you said, when you give people the option to have whatever they want, they typically go, well, I could have the whatever meal it is that they consider a bad meal, but you know what? I've done so well for the last couple of days. And I'm also satiated. I'm not missing any macronutrients or micronutrients. I'm probably just going to make a better decision here." And it's about trying to find that balance for people. It's finding what is going to get them the results they want, but also allow them to get it in a way that isn't extremely restrictive. And if there is an extremely restrictive part, it's explained to them. And I always try to make sure, okay, look, for the next X amount of weeks, because you want this goal, we're going to have to reduce potentially this intake of, maybe alcohol or something like that. But yeah, good and bad foods, gross oversimplification of what food is. There's so much nuance that goes to food. I mean, even just how we look at food in terms of how intertwined it is with our like communities. I mean, think about Christmas. What is one of the things that people think about and love about Christmas? Christmas
Yeah,
dinner.
yeah, yeah.
Thanksgiving for the Americans and the Canadians is based on food. Most holidays we have are based around food. So there's foods that, say a food is good or bad is just, I said, it's a very black and white way of looking at things, which we cannot look at it through that lens at all. We want to have a good, healthy relationship with food, so it's important that we kind of establish that straight away. What about you? Do you ever get, what do you say if someone says to you, "Oh, I've heard this is bad"? What would your response be to that?
Yeah, I think we're on a very similar page to like in terms of how we approach things. And I think generally if you go by sort of an 80 or 90% to 10 to 20% rule in terms of 80 to 90% of the time you're eating like whole unprocessed foods, and then you like the rest of the time you have a bit of flexibility to have whatever you want. And I think for like flexibility is something that we like it is really important to give a lot of people, and that's not just looking at sort of food choices, but also quantities, and what we'll go on to next, in terms of like point number two is like our calories across the week,
Yeah,
because at the end of the day people think they think they need to be like every single day needs to be like if they're trying to lose weight, they want to be in a deficit, they think they need to be in a deficit every single day, whereas they don't, they need to be in like a deficit over an average of 7 days, which means that some days can be lower and some days can be higher, so you can have some flexibility to go and enjoy some social things, or um like you say, having more structure in the week when it's probably easy to have more structure, and then having a bit more flexibility on the weekends when you probably want to do that when your life is less structured and there's potentially more social stuff going on.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I completely agree. I think having allowing for some flexibility is really key, and just moving away from sort of good and bad, and feeling guilty around when like as and when you do consume cakes, chocolates, biscuits, processed foods, like whatever it is, because you like you can fit some of that stuff in on a weekly basis and have no like negative consequences from doing it. But if you're feeling guilty about it, then you'll probably have more negative consequences because you'll behave differently as a result of that. But
Yes.
We should probably move. We've kind of touched on it quite a few times, so we should probably move on to point number two, because
Let's
this is
go.
going to frame a lot of the kind of further conversations, which is um, like when I'm looking at kind of simplifying nutrition as much as possible for clients. Like if you like break it down, the three biggest rocks that you can kind of focus on. That if all you do is focus on these three things, you're going to get probably 90%, maybe 95% of any of the results that you could possibly get. If you understand all of the nuance of everything else. And that is understanding calories and knowing how much your body needs for the goal that you're trying to achieve, whether that's if you're trying to drop weight and being in a deficit, whether you're attempting to sort of maintain your weight and stay at maintenance, or whether you're trying to build a little bit of muscle mass and push into a bit more of a surplus. Like understanding your energy, your calorie amounts, and your energy balance is really really key. Second point is protein, and making sure you are getting enough protein in to sustain, like to help you build and maintain as much muscle mass as possible, from a training perspective, but also from a longevity perspective. Obviously, we know like holding on to as much muscle mass as possible is going to be really, really beneficial. And then the last point is getting in enough fruit and veg slash fiber. Um, and like obviously like fruit and veg, plenty of like micronutrients, plenty of fiber in there anyway. You might want to supplement with a little bit more fiber, but if you're hitting those three things, you're going to be 95% of the way there in terms of your nutrition. And there's obviously there's loads of different ways you can kind of break that down to suit the person in front of you. And obviously there's like all these kind of named diets. They're like the vast majority of named diets are essentially a way to restrict calories and put some kind of constraint on doing that. Um, so, but if you understand like the premise of what it's doing, then it makes it much easier to kind of play within those boundaries yourself. What in terms of kind of breaking those things down, like how would you sort of explain those to clients?
Very similar as well in the approach of let's focus on what's going to kind of take up most of this pie chart we're looking at, and obviously calories are king. Like if you're not sitting at the right amount of calories for your goal, it doesn't matter what your protein is, doesn't matter what your carbs are, fats are, those micronutrients, macronutrients, none of them mean anything if you're not in the correct place for your goal. As you mentioned earlier as well, it's the average. The law of averages is what really kicks in here. And I think that allows people a lot more flexibility when it comes to day to day decisions. There's some days I wake up and everyone wakes up and they're sometimes a bit hungrier than others. Some days you wake up and you're not hungry at all. Just that's just the nature of being human. Our appetite and our satiety is going to fluctuate quite a lot. And whenever you're restricted to a certain number, let's say 2,000 calories, just for a number to work with, if you feel like you need to hit that every single day, you are being extremely restrictive of your decision making, and honestly, you're probably creating, if you're not careful with it, you're probably creating a negative relationship with your nutrition anyway. So that's one of the food prisons that I think people put themselves in is unnecessarily, which is okay, if I have to be in a deficit and this is the number that I need to be to achieve that deficit, I need to get that number every single day. You don't. As you said, it's an average. So you could go over slightly some days where you're hungrier, and then other days where you're busy and you maybe don't have time. You go, okay, well, I know I'm not going to be that busy then, so I'll just take away a couple of the calories or adjust it to make sure that at the end of the week you're sitting where you need to be on average. And as you said as well, calories are king. That's going to ultimately dictate whether you're losing weight, gaining weight, or maintaining weight. Protein is again the next thing I always focus on. Protein is going to be the thing that's going to change your composition because again, being in a calorie deficit, losing weight, you're going to lose body fat and muscle. Similarly, that whenever you're trying to put on size, you're going to gain both muscle and body fat, and we're trying to do in both of those things minimize the one that are less desirable. So when we're putting on weight, we're trying to reduce the amount of body fat we're putting on, increase the tissue, and then when we're cutting, hold on to as much muscle tissue as we possibly can and try and get rid of as much body fat. Now that's where protein comes in. Protein is obviously going to help rebuild, repair tissue. Whenever you're training, it's kind of important. But also the aspect that not a lot of people realize or talk about that much is how thermic protein is. So in terms of energy breakdown, some foods require, some foods require more energy for your body to break down and utilize. Protein is by far and away the most energy consuming because it just takes more energy for our body to break down, utilize, and then transport protein across the body. So if your if your diet is high in protein, you're covering your bases when it comes to losing muscle tissue or building it. You're also then increasing your satiety, so you're not going to feel as hungry, which is obviously a massive benefit if you're in a deficit. But then also, you're increasing your thermic effects. You're increasing how many calories you're actually just burning passively by having a higher protein diet. And then lastly, obviously, fiber. Fiber is just incredibly important. In fact, I did a coaching webinar. I got a guy to come in to talk about it, and it was like a 90-minute conversation about how important fiber was. And I was like, you could have just had a slide saying fiber is really effing important, and he went, "Yeah, but you paid me to come in to fluff it out a bit." But yeah, that was a real eye opener for me about how important fiber is. Now, the question that you probably get as well is like, what about fats and carbs? So, to me, and again, you can tell me whether you agree on this, but I think having to track those, which by the way, if you get my Fitness Pal or any tracking, it'll always ask you to get exact percentages of those macronutrients, which is why so many people are confused and we're like, it doesn't overly matter what your fats and carbs are. The only people that I think really need to be concerned about that specific breakdown are elite athletes who need to know, oh, I'm getting my carbs here, fats here, and they're really trying to get the most out of their nutrition. Or people who have illnesses that require them to monitor those things a bit more closely, like CF related diabetes, things of that nature. But yeah, a lot of people don't realize that you don't need to overly be concerned about your breakdown of carbs and fat. Realistically, just mix it up. As long as it's in the calorie numbers that you need to be in, you can mix and
Yeah,
match. So
yeah,
some
yeah,
days more carby. So yeah,
yeah.
what about you?
So I was just going to say, like, for anyone that isn't aware, you've got obviously your total calories is the total amount of energy that you're taking in. Within those calories, basically all foods are going to be broken down into either protein, carbs, or fat. So those are our three macronutrients. There's also alcohol in there, which is slightly different, but for
Yeah,
the sake of
wow.
simplicity, we've got those three. Um, Carbs and protein have 4 calories per gram. Fats have 9 calories per gram. So fats are obviously like have a lot higher energy density. Um, so if you're looking at your total calories that you're taking in, basically once you've taken care of the like your portion of protein, which generally around about 1.5 grams per kilo of body weight is a good place for people to aim for. Maybe slightly higher if they're in a harder deficit or
Mhm.
they're like already quite lean. The rest of your calories can be like what Ben was saying, can be split between fats and carbs. And like Ben said, we don't need, unless you're sort of an elite athlete or an endurance athlete or have a medical condition that requires you to look at those things. You can have some flexibility in what that looks like. And yes, there's a minimum that you should probably aim for fats, just because there are some essential fats that your body needs for hormone production and stuff like that. But like most people would be hitting that anyway if like unless they try and take their fats super low. So yeah, you can have flexibility within that. I find most people generally, particularly if they're in a deficit, will perform slightly better with slightly more carbs, slightly less fats, just because, as I said, fats are slightly higher energy density, which means that like the volumes that you'll probably be able to have will be a little bit lower. So and also, if you're having more carbs, you'll probably be able to have slightly bigger portions, which obviously is good for satiety, and also. Um, what was I going to say? It's literally the point has just gone. Um,
Nature podcast. I'm sure it'll pop up. Sure it'll pop up.
um, what was
So
it?
you, fats, carbs. You were saying that people
Oh,
could.
and also you'll probably be like you probably feel like you're able to train slightly better because carbs are going to help you fuel your training. Um, so yeah, those are the main things there, and just on Ben's point, it's quite interesting actually. Like, I was looking at this recently. If you're say you are trying to be in a deficit, but you do end up overeating. If you overeat on protein, only 60% of those calories will actually be turned into fat essentially. So it's really like inefficient to turn protein into fats. carbs is about 80%, and then fats are like near enough 100%. So if you are eating in a surplus, if you have like if a, basically you're better off overeating on carbs and protein than you are overeating on fats. If you do
If
end up
given the
like
choice.
overeating, which I thought was quite an
Okay.
interesting point, and or just kind of tying back to anyone that does do any kind of endurance stuff. Obviously, you've heard of kind of carb loading and sort of pushing your carbs up before a race. If you keep your fats really low and push like keep protein moderate and then push your carbs right up, which is what you would do, you will end up being in a surplus. But actually, like for a day or so, it's a day or so is not going to make a massive impact on your body composition, but also carbs being stored slightly inefficiently is going to mean that like it's not actually going to be as much of a surplus as what you anticipate. So you'll end up getting like fully stocked up on glycogen, but you won't like necessarily put on loads and loads of body fat as a result of doing that. Just a slight tangent for you.
Well, there we go. I like it. I like it. No, that's actually really interesting as well. The other thing I say to people is, look, if you are going to get into into the grass about, the weeds about nutrition, as you said earlier, carbs are your best source of fuel for performance. So if you're having to be precise about things, carbs pre and post workout is a good kind of rule of thumb. If you're going to have carbs, pre post workout's a good place to kind of sandwich them. The other thing I would say is, in terms of like a practical tool here, download MyFitnessPal, download any form of tracking app, and just learn about your foods, which I think kind of ties nicely into point number three, which is
That's
awareness.
exactly our point number three.
Look at that segue. Look at that. So yeah, I think a lot of people. I say this very frequently, but a lot of people think it's going to take a lot more energy and effort and intensity to get something they want. I'm like, honestly, a lot of the times it's just pointing your attention and focus on one thing. So, for example, I'll just say to people, look, focus on getting your protein. No matter how much do I need to get? Just like, look, let's not worry about that just yet. Let's focus on you just identifying protein sources in your meals and trying to increase those. If you do that, the likelihood is you're going to get better at identifying protein and starting to consume it that little bit more. Again, fiber. People are trying to get more fiber. I'm like, well, how would you increase your fiber by 1 gram? You'd probably just eat like an apple or a handful of blueberries, or instead of getting overwhelmed by how much you need to get to, think of, oh, well, how would I increase it by like 5 grams, whether that's protein or fiber. But I think tracking gives you such a good. I always refer to it as it's kind of like the driving test before you get out on the roads. You need your driving test, you need to do your practical and your theory. I think tracking is that equivalent where you kind of get your training wheels on, you understand what foods are. And again, we have what, 30? Most people have about 30 foods that they kind of frequently cycle through. So we have pretty much the same 30 foods. If you learn what the properties of those 30 foods are that you consume most regularly, you're going to have a way better indication of like where the holes are in your diet. Because a lot of people think they need to completely change everything when it comes to diet. And I'm like, a lot of times it's just looking at what you're currently doing and making little tweaks, which I find to be, in terms of lifestyle and habit forming, far easier. So I'd say, yeah, just think about tracking, get yourself an app, download one of those apps, and just start to learn about what is in your food, so you do build up that awareness. What about you? What, in terms of awareness, like what would you talk about in that perspective when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, I completely agree, mate. I think um, the goal would never be to use one of those apps for the long term. And I find like some people kind of drop in and out, but using it for a short period just to understand the total calories and also roughly like what macronutrients you are eating. I think it's a really really valuable tool, and some people do like end up enjoying it because there's an extra layer of accountability, and you probably do have a little bit more flexibility if you are tracking, just because you know a little bit more in depth, like how many calories you've eaten, how many you can potentially like eat later on, or like,
You've got,
that sort of thing.
you've got more
I
awareness.
I
You've got more awareness. You've
Yeah,
got more
more
awareness. That's
awareness.
actually right. I said I
That's
wasn't supposed to make
exactly
you
it.
laugh.
Yeah.
That's it. Look, you said the thing.
Oh, damn it. I've done quite well not to cough though.
We have, yeah.
Um,
I have to make you laugh
oh
harder.
no.
There he is.
Um, um, but yeah, I think in a short term, building that awareness is so useful for like it's it's a lifelong skill, really, or maybe not a skill, like lifelong knowledge, having that awareness of what's in the food that you're eating. Because, like I said, once you've built that awareness once, yeah, you might dip back in at a later date to kind of just like refine and tweak, but you're gonna know like, okay, this is a good protein source. This has roughly this amount of calories. I know that I'm gonna end up being in and around the right place from like for my body from a calorie perspective if I'm eating these things. I think it's such a powerful thing to build that awareness, and I think it helps us move away from that sort of emotion and potential guilt that people have from like these health halos of like, oh, this is a good food, this is a bad food. Um, because you are sort of like you're kind of breaking it down into like, okay, this has this many calories, this has these macronutrients, and obviously there's more to it than that. Like we've like obviously we've touched on sort of whole and processed foods and versus processed foods, and we're going to talk about that in a sec. But yeah, I think it's a really valuable tool for like I think everyone should do it for a short period just to get an idea of where they're at.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
awareness also comes to mind whenever you're thinking about your own decisions as well when it comes to nutrition. So awareness doesn't just like, hey, be aware that there's protein here, be aware that there's, the values of food. I think a good thing to kind of lump into awareness is your own decision making when it comes to nutrition. Like when do you snack? When do you eat? When do you typically, make decisions that maybe in the long term are not beneficial to you, trying to identify even potential triggers as well, like awareness of triggers. Like if you get bad news, do you starve or do you feast? And again, everyone's so different when it comes to this. What are you, a stress eater or a stress starver? I'm more of a stress starver than anything. What about you?
I, I think it depends what like it kind of depends what mood I'm in. I could go either way.
Yeah, I'm typically, I forget to eat a lot of the time. I'll
I've
just,
never done that.
yeah,
I don't understand people who forget to eat.
yeah,
Like
I know, I'm one of
breakfast
those
time.
people. Again, I wake up and I think there's 50% of people roughly wake up hungry. 50% of people wake up absolutely fine. I'm one of those people. I could go until 2, 3 o'clock without eating. And again, that's why this is so important because everyone is so unique and so individual that you need to be aware of your decisions, how it's going to work for you. And we'll talk about that in the last point, but it's always just worth kind of having awareness, not only in just the properties of the foods you're eating, but then your decisions around those foods. So trying to identify
Yeah, yeah.
triggers, snacks, things like that. I think awareness really does come into the picture. But
Absolutely. And just to add to that, like it's kind of a little bit of a tangent. I mentioned earlier, obviously got like I've got young boys. Um, I think it's really interesting the sort of the like how we talk about food. And obviously when like if you've got a child that doesn't eat, you're going to do everything you can to try and get them to eat when they're obviously sat at the table. But I think it's really something I sort of catch myself doing is like sort of saying, oh, you're a good boy because you finished because you had this or you like you've eaten this when it like and attaching that little bit of morality to like every single meal. And it's really interesting when you start to become aware of those things and how you're sort of conditioned through your environment growing up and through school and all the rest of it, like how you sort of interact with food and building awareness of that, both from how you behave yourself but also like I said, for me it was like the biggest eye opener was when I was like sat at the table having like dinner with my boys and like started saying, "Oh, like good boy for like for finishing that." It's like, no,
parents,
hold on, that's like like you finishing what's on your plate has no impact on whether you're good or not. And like yeah, it's really interesting when you start to sort of identify those triggers.
knowledge
Yes,
of it.
it's like
I
yeah.
love that you brought that up. I love that you brought that up because this is where I love this conversation topic when it comes to my clients as well, where you realize how generationally impacted our relationship with food is. Because that idea, that I guarantee you, that came from your parents, that came from their parents, because their parents grew up in the war, where you have to eat all the food in your plate because you don't know when you're going to get it, or the classic line of "there's starving kids in Africa," which I'm sure everybody probably
Yeah.
has heard that line because, and that's the reason why a lot of negative slash bad things in the world exist because we never challenge those decisions. We've been told you eat everything on your
Yeah.
plate because our parents told
Yeah.
us that, but their parents told us that.
Yeah.
So until we have the awareness to be like, why do I I'm going to challenge that thought. I'm going to challenge my perspective of this way of acting. It's so important, but you don't realize that you're doing it because your parents did it, they did it because their parents did it, and it's amazing the impact that two generations have had. And I guarantee, no matter how aware you are of that, you'll probably say it again because it's just
Yeah,
inbuilt.
absolutely.
And your boys will probably then grow up and they might have that same mindset because they're like, I did that. And again, our brains are super simple where your boys finish their food, you say, well done, they get a dopamine
Yeah.
thing of, I'm a good boy, I had all
Yeah.
my food on the plate, so they're going to start. And it's a slippery slope, and it's a very difficult thing to actually change. And that's, going off on another fairly decent tangent here. You have to challenge your thoughts around food. You have to challenge your behaviors. If you don't challenge them and you don't question them, you're going to just by default, because of how we are, make the same decision over and over and over again. So I love the fact you brought that up because that is it's a big one. Challenging our perspective on foods and on how we treat them is super important, especially if we're looking for this
Yeah.
long term as well.
Yeah. And it's I think it's really interesting where it comes from because I think there's like obviously there's an element of you wanting your children to be healthy. There's also an element of like say in the war, food was scarce, so like you can't waste food. And I remember like I was sat in a coffee shop a few months ago, and a dad had bought his boy a massive chocolate chip cookie, and he was like, "You have to finish that, because I've just spent this money on it." And it's like obviously obviously I didn't say anything, but it's like that's such a like
Excuse me,
it's what did
wish
you
you had
mean?
that. I'll eat the
But it's
cookie.
like it's so interesting. Like it's yeah, it's really obvious how we've kind of grown up with those kind of ingrained patterns. And actually, like there was a parenting book that I was listening to recently that actually like it framed it so well in terms of the parent's responsibility and the child's responsibility. And the parent's responsibility is like what you're eating, when you're eating it, and where you're eating it. So obviously, like you're preparing the meal, you're putting it on the table. Assuming you're like sat at the table for it, you're saying what time. The child's only responsibility is deciding how much, and you should not try and like those should be the boundaries that you put in place. And obviously, if the child like doesn't want it and then wants food later, that's again your boundary to be like yes or no. But I thought that was a really sort of simple but nice way to frame it. It's like this is your responsibility. If you're doing this, you're ticking the boxes, you're doing everything you need to. How much they eat is up to them, and obviously that's assuming you're not giving them something that they absolutely detest and obviously won't eat. So you're like working within their sort of like what they like within reason, but making sure they're getting the food in that they need that is going to help them grow and be healthy.
Yeah, it is a tricky one as well because you obviously know the benefits of certain foods and like, I mean, my cool uncle powers are used frequently whenever we're eating with my nephews because if there's any protein on the table, it's always now if you want to look like Uncle Ben, you have to eat all your protein,
Yeah.
you have to eat all your vegetables, and again, like even just that perspective of framing things of if you want this, then you have to do this. You don't. Again, we're all just making kind of the best decisions we think in the situation, but you're always unsure. It's like, is this a good thing? Should I be saying this? It's a very very slippery slope and a tricky one to navigate for sure. So
Yeah.
moving on to point number four: processed versus
Before.
unprocessed food. Yeah. So what is your interpretation of processed versus unprocessed? What's your take on that? If someone comes to you and say, "Oh, this is processed, this is unprocessed," what's your go to when it comes to stuff like that? When it comes to educating someone around that?
So I think we should start by clarifying exactly what we mean by that. So obviously there's a massive debate at the moment about ultra processed foods, after sort of the Joe Wicks thing about the
Bar
like the
was it?
protein bar that'll give
Yeah,
give you cancer or whatever.
yeah.
Um, if you're like breaking it down, really we've got three categories. We've got unprocessed, so that's basically just a food that is what it is. There's no additional ingredients. It's like I said, it's chicken, it's a carrot, it's a potato,
Egg.
it's there's nothing else there. So that's unprocessed. Then you've got processed, which is up to 5 ingredients, and then you've got ultra processed, which I don't know if this is the definitive language, something that has like more than 5 ingredients. I've heard people talk about like it's got more most of the ingredients are stuff that you wouldn't necessarily find in your cupboards, which kind of makes more sense.
Yeah.
But we've got those kind of three groups really, and like I said earlier, I think the main thing is not demonizing processed or ultra processed, but more so focusing on trying to get people to eat unprocessed whole foods as much as possible. And I think just like when you're looking at behavior change generally, looking at moving towards something rather than away from something is a lot more motivating anyway. So like I said earlier, if you tell someone you can't have something, that's the first thing they're going to want to have. Whereas if you say, okay, cool, you've got you've got some meat, you've got some like potatoes on your plate. Let's try and increase the amount of vegetables we got there. So let's try and aim for two pieces of veg on your plate, like when every time you sit down for dinner. So you're moving towards more vegetables on your plate rather than moving away from less of
Yeah.
something else, which is a much easier substitution. So I think there's that, and then I think also just in terms of obviously we've spoken about sort of good and bad foods, the health halos. I think there's a lot to be said there of like yeah we like we've obviously said like calories and protein, like yeah you could fit a load of unprocessed foods into that bracket. Everyone knows realistically, like trying to just fit pizza and ice cream into that, you're going to feel quite like pretty rubbish. So let's maybe aim for like 80 to 90% like whole unprocessed foods. And then, yeah, like you might want to avoid, like you might want to try and avoid like really processed foods potentially. But also, I think if we just say like, yeah, let's try not to like overconsume them, but also like you don't have to cut them out all the time because at the end of the day, if it is a relatively small amount of your diet, is it going to have loads of impact? Probably not. If you're a health-seeking person who trains and generally eats pretty well anyway. What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I agree as well. Like the idea of unprocessed, processed versus, there's all those scales. But even then, you think, if you go into let's go on another little tangent. You think about how even the foods that we consider unprocessed are probably quite processed, even like fruit and vegetables. So you think of like bananas. Someone go, well, that's an unprocessed. And I'm like, is it though? Because we've genetically engineered the shit out of that thing. Like bananas do not look anything like what a banana would have looked like in the wild from, you know, hundreds and thousands of years ago. It doesn't look the same because we've genetically modified a lot of stuff. So when you go to that level, you're like, even the things that we think are the good things, again, air quoting for flip's sake on a podcast, there's a level of them that are still processed. So there's no point in getting super bent out of shape about trying to be unprocessed, least processed, processed, you highly processed. What you said is perfect. Just try to, as best as you can, increase the amount of foods that you have, which are, for the most part, single ingredient or minimal ingredients, versus the foods that are super processed that would survive in a fallout. If you can kind of lean
Yeah.
more towards that and less towards that, again, dangers in the dosage. Like, you said that earlier as well, that if you eat pizza, you eat all the kind of not the most nutritionally dense foods in the world, you're gonna feel pretty trashy. Like I love this, and this is one of the things I always say to people. There's a lot of little phrases that we kind of chuck around, but one of them is "you are what you eat." That is factually correct. Every single cell in your body over the 7 year period is recreated and rebuilt. The only way that can be rebuilt, those cells, is through the energy that you are giving your food. So if you're eating, a lot of less ideal foods, that's what your body is going to be making those cells out of. So you literally are what you eat. So if you're wanting a body that is healthy, is strong, robust into old age, it probably makes sense to lean more towards that. However, it's very we can't. I don't think we can go past this topic without being aware of the fact that there's a price consideration between those two as well.
Oh, of course.
Unprocessed foods typically less less affordable, Processed foods, way more affordable from the simple fact that you think about why we started messing around with foods, transportation and stock and shelf life. Most foods have been tampered with to that degree so that they can make money, they can make more money. Things are in cans because you can have cans sitting on a shelf for a year or two, whereas fresh bread, I mean, for me, we bought bread the other day and it's moldy already. So, it's a lot of it comes down to that the practicalities of how do we waste less and make more money. So a lot of decisions come from that too. But yeah, we can't fly past this without saying that we're completely aware of the fact that processed foods or ultra processed foods typically they're going to be cheaper, which again makes things a little bit more achievable for people. So whilst yes, ideally we should be trying to aim more towards whole foods and single ingredient foods. And another simple thing to think of is how quickly does it rot? That's a really simple way of looking at food. If you left chicken on the counter all day, would you eat it? Probably not. Whereas a Big Mac, you could leave a Big Mac on the counter all day and it probably wouldn't be great, but it's not going to harm you. Foods that rot quickly are typically going to break down faster. Your body's going to be able to utilize and absorb those nutrients a little bit more easily compared to the foods that have been heavily fortified, again, to reduce the amount of rot and wastage as well. So, yeah, it's good to point out that, yes, ideally whole foods, but realistically, I mean, convenience wise, price wise, the economy, which is ridiculous, I'm even saying that, but it's worth to consider. Yes, those foods are not bad, but again, danger in the dosage. Just try to reduce the amount of decisions you're making that end up with you eating a highly processed food. But again,
Yeah.
if you're eating well for the most part, it's a drop in the ocean. It's not going to be a big
Yeah.
deal.
Exactly, and I think it's quite interesting when you like. So obviously it's become a bit of a hot topic recently in terms of after the like particularly after the Joe Wicks sort of protein bar. I think the the quality of the evidence and studies at the moment is like it's a lot of them are observational studies, so they're not particularly well. There's going to be some error within those studies, and yes, they're showing things like increased risk of diabetes, increased risk of cardiovascular disease from people that consume more ultra processed foods, and that probably like would be like that probably would be the case. Um, but we don't have the evidence right now to say definitively this thing causes
This
this.
causes, yeah,
And,
causes
and
Y. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, because quite often in those studies, there's also like the whole sort of the when like the red meat or processed meat causes cancer. It wasn't just it wasn't just the diet that people had. It was like they were extrapolating it of like okay, the people that consume more like red meat are more likely to develop this disease, but also that like those people were also not exercising. Most of them were smoking. That like there was a lot of confounding factors that also tied into that. So to say it's definitely this thing and it's definitely going to do this, I don't think we can say that definitively at the moment. And also, like not all of the studies, but a lot of the studies basically show the increased risk comes about off the back of people gaining a lot of weight because generally ultra processed foods are highly palatable. You can eat
indeed.
they're very calorie dense. You can eat a lot of calories in a short space of time. They're not particularly satiating. So that kind of cycles back to our kind of like our calorie argument. Like if you're eating some of those things in moderation, but you're keeping it within your calories, yeah, it's like there's potentially better options, but it like a lot of those negative consequences do come as a result of put like essentially like putting on weight and weight gain. And there was like this was years ago now. There's a guy who ate only ice cream and some like a multivitamin, I think, but he was eating in a calories deficit. And yes, he felt like absolute crap and energy wise was rubbish and like he was hungry all the time because obviously ice cream's not going to fill you up, but he dropped weight because he was eating in a calorie deficit, and as a result of that, all of his blood markers showed an improvement from a health perspective,
Because
because because he'd dropped weight and he was at a healthier body weight regardless of what he'd been eating. And
yeah,
I feel like I'm kind of going in a bit of a circle here. I'm not saying we should try and we should
No,
try
you're
and
saying it's
fit
not
these
black
things
and white.
in.
Yeah,
Um, but I think also a lot of people like jump on these things like, oh, you absolutely can't eat that because of this, this, and this. But it's actually like there's a lot more involved. And actually, as we spoke about earlier, if you're eating it like in a balanced diet, like a small amount of it is like, is it going to make a difference? Probably not.
yeah,
So I think we're just like, I think it's worth being aware of those things, and also the fact that like ultra processed anything over 5 ingredients, like there's a massive range of like different things that could fall into that, like baked beans, for example, which yeah, there may be better options, but actually like bit of protein, bit of fiber, yeah, maybe a little bit of sugar, but like a baked bean's gonna cause these things, like probably not, versus something that like that is that like ultra processed that has like loads of emulsifiers and E numbers and like everything else in. It's like they're kind of blanketed in the same bracket when in actual fact there's going to be variance within that
100%.
bracket, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you know what that reminds me of? Do you ever remember the whole thing of lifting weights stunts your growth? Like that
But
whole,
yeah,
and then the actual reason why that was initially kind of pushed forward was simply because scientists went into a gym, looked around and saw a lot of shorter men, short kings, and just went, well, we can extrapolate the fact that all these people are, short kings. They're all lifting weights. Oh, it must be the weights. It must be lifting weights that's making these people shorter. Also, who in their right mind is going to put their kid through a study that might stunt their growth? So it just reminds me of that, where like people have gone, that's the cause. And you're like, wow, but there's so much more to it than just that, and that's very reductive of a way of looking at things. But just when you were talking about that, it just reminded me of that idea that yeah, lifting weights stunts your growth. Oh, it's nothing to do with the fact that people who are maybe shorter want to maybe can't get taller, so maybe we can just get wider. I'm saying me because I'm a short king. Yeah. Well, compared to
I've got a.
everyone else I hang out with, because they're all over 6 foot, you sons of bitches. But anyway, so I think that's
I was just gonna say I've got another nice tangent as well, just
go
off the
for it.
back of that.
The point of the podcast.
So there's a really long study that like it was over 14 years, and it was predominantly looking at cardiovascular disease and all cause mortality. Um, but basically, those four groups. There was people who ate a good diet and trained. There's people that ate a good diet but didn't train. There's people that trained but ate a poor diet, and there was people that didn't train and ate a poor diet. And um, the people who so the obviously the people who trained and ate a good diet had the best outcomes, but the people that trained and had good cardiovascular fitness but ate a poor diet actually had a much better outcome than the people who ate a good diet but didn't do any training. And it was like quite I can't remember the exact numbers, but there was quite a big difference in those things. So it like it's really interesting. Obviously, we're talking about this now, but like it's just the power of actually doing some kind of cardiovascular training on top of that. Like you're gonna be healthier regardless of what you eat if you do some training. And I just like not to say that that like nutrition's not important, because obviously like it is very very important. But I just found it really fascinating that like that was the outcome, and the like the difference in sort of like the levels between the people that did train but had a poor diet versus the people that didn't train but ate well, just in terms of those outcomes.
Yeah, that is crazy. I mean, I'm sure you hear this all the time. It's like, oh, it's 90%. It's 90% diet. It's X percent this. It's X percent that. It's if you're looking for the best possible outcome, it's not a case of, oh, it's this percentage to this. It's all of them combined to whatever the best abilities you have and have available to you. That's going to work. And I think that leads perfectly on to point number 5, which is finding your own way slash your own path when it comes to nutrition, and the idea that there's no perfect diet. In fact, the example I like to use here is I had 2 clients, and I like to ask my clients, like, give me a win. I always like, just give me a win. Try and find a win in your week, and it just allows them to focus on the things they've done well rather than things that maybe haven't gone as well. But I had 2 clients, and their wins were so different. It was incredible. So one of them, her win was the fact that she was able to go out with her friends and have lunch. Now you're probably thinking, well, that's not that big of a deal. But her win was the idea, it was the fact that she went to Marks and Spencer's and was able to get a meal deal out of the freezer or the fridge, sorry. Whereas opposed to that, where she was like, I have to cook and prepare all of my meals. So for her, the win for her was she was getting more flexibility in her nutrition. Whereas my other client, that same week, which is crazy, she said that she went out for food with her friends and she didn't have what they were having because she knows it's a triggering food. They went out for pizzas and she was like, I'm good. I'm going to have the food that I brought with me. So, two completely different outcomes, but both of them being a win, which is why finding your own path and finding your direction and not trying to chase perfect, because perfect when it comes to nutrition doesn't exist, like, at all. It shouldn't be in the conversation, but I think finding your own path is going to be so important for this to work. Look, the point of this podcast is not to get you in shape for 6 weeks, 12 weeks. It's give you information that's going to benefit you up until the very end, because that's what I'm in this for. I'm not here for a short period of time. I want to do whatever I'm doing. It needs to work for me at that moment in time. So when it comes to nutrition, be cautious of who you listen to, including us as well. Like, find what works for you, but be cautious of who you're taking your information from. Because one, the first thing you need to ask yourself, if you're going to take advice from someone, what's their lifestyle like? Like, if someone comes on TikTok or Instagram and says, "This is what I eat in a day," first of all, go, okay, well, that's them. Do they have the same responsibilities as me, the same time, commitments to me, the same relationship with food as I do? I mean, already into those three things, you probably find that none of them line up with you as an individual. So what I'd suggest is, if you are looking at things on social media, look at the principles, not the specifics of what they're doing. So in their first meal of the day, what is the point of their first meal? Is it going to give them protein? Is it giving them good fiber to start their day? Is it going to give them a good point that they're going to feel satiated so they're not going to make poor decisions later on? Look at the principles rather than the exact details of what they're doing in order to find what works for you. So when it comes to people saying, like, do I need to eat a certain way? How many meals a day do I need to have? Like, what would you tell someone who is maybe concerned that they have to live or find something that doesn't work for them, or have to adhere to something that doesn't work for them? What would your advice be for someone when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of classic principles versus methods sort of argument, and like have it like we said about building that awareness, like building awareness and having an understandable understanding of the underlying principles that you need allows you to play and create your own methods, if you like, of putting that together in a way that works for your life. And like we said earlier, it's like if you're putting things together in a way that allows you to eat the right amount of calories, getting enough protein, get enough fruit and veg and fiber into your day, and fuel yourself for your training well. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing, because you can find it's like what this is called. You can find your own path with that. And I think my overall goal when I work with anyone when it comes to nutrition is basically to find a place where it's easy and enjoyable, and they're able to like get the results that they want to and maintain those results for as long as possible. But it also have no hang-ups about food, like have no qualms about going out and enjoying a meal, have no qualms about doing like the social stuff that they want to do, and do all those things without feeling guilty, but know how to potentially put things together in a way that they're able to do that whilst also getting their goals. Um, yeah, and I think that's like we've obviously given some of like the broad principles that we kind of use. I think a lot of the sort of the named diets, if you like, people buy into them and find them useful because they do have a black and white constraint a lot of the time. Like, don't eat this food group, don't do like. Don't do this. Don't eat here. Don't eat there.
Rule.
Like, do intermittent fasting, that sort of thing. And I think like whilst understanding the underlying principles like is absolutely essential, you like if you find those things useful, like you said about kind of triggering foods and removing them, it like you can use some of those constraints if you find it helpful. Like for some people, I think intermittent fasting is a great way to go about things, particularly if like wake up, they're not particularly hungry and don't want to think about food first thing. Like, cool, push your first meal to like 11, 12 o'clock. And then also a lot of the time, most people end up overeating in the evening when they kind of sit down. So it's like if you put a black and white constraint of like, okay, I'm not going to eat after 7 p.m. It's like it sometimes makes it a little bit easier rather than being like giving people that flexibility, and then also that them not being able to handle that. So I think there's definitely a time and place for creating more black and white rules around nutrition, but it's essential to understand the principles, and it's by kind of trial and error of finding what works for you with your lifestyle that is going to, at the end of the day, be the best for you, rather than like looking at. There's nothing magical about what any influence or like people are doing on like on social media in terms of like, oh, here's what I eat
I'm
in a day.
magic. What are you
Yeah,
talking about?
you are pretty
What?
magic, to be fair.
Thanks, Tom. Same, same. But no, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree as well. Like it's finding what works for you as an individual, and like I think I've said this before, but we have this innate ability to make a decision fairly damn quickly. Like I can look at someone's, hey, this is a meal I made that's got X amount of protein in it, and I can look at that and go, okay, well I know my cooking abilities and my honestly level of flips I give. I'm not going to ever make that because that's going to take 40 minutes to make. I don't. I know personally that I don't enjoy cooking that much. I'm not like a ratatouille. Like, oh yeah, give me this, give me that. I'm like, cook the meal so I can eat it already. If I could skip that part, I would. Like, I'm not that type of person. But some people are. Some people are foodies. Some people are obsessed with food and really, really take a lot more from it than other people. Me and my mum always joke about this. If I could take a tablet which fed me all the nutrients I need and I didn't ever have to cook or worry about food again, I'd probably take that tablet. Whereas that would be someone's worst nightmare, like
yeah, I
to
would hate
not be able
that.
to eat food again. So again, that's why it's so different. You have to find what works. I'm not bothered. Like I know again, like having set things to eat as well. Like most mornings, I have the same breakfast. Most lunches are the same for me. That works for me as an individual. But that's again someone's worst nightmare. But at the same time, sometimes you need to, as you said earlier, sometimes you need to have those temporary walls to keep people in because if you give them too much flexibility and too much freedom, they get lost. It's like in a game where it's non-linear versus linear games. Like linear games, you go from point A to point B to point C to point D, whereas you get thrown into like an open world and you're like, where do I,
Yeah,
where
where
do
do
I
I
start?
start?
Where do I start? And they're like, well, it doesn't matter. You
Yeah,
can start wherever you want. You're like, but what's the best place? Like everyone goes, what's
yeah,
the
yeah,
best place to start though, or what's the best way to go? So yeah, I think you have to find what works for you, but you then have to be able to find. And I think if you're ever going to input like a restriction of some form, it's really important for you to understand why you're making that restriction. So if I'm ever going to restrict foods from people, from my clients, I'll say, look, the reason why we're doing this is because X, Y, and Z. That's why we're doing this. It's not going to be forever. It's not going to be permanent. This is just for this goal that we're working on. Do you understand why we're doing that? And it's always for me. I always like to give people like to hear that, so that verbal confirmation of yes, I understand. Because a lot of people can nod along and be like, what?
yeah,
What are you expecting me to
yeah,
do?
yeah.
Like, you want that kind of, and if you don't know, get a coach. Like, simple as that. Tom and I are quite good at what we do. So, if you want to check with us, then you should.
We
I
like
think,
we like to think so.
yeah, yeah,
Just on that point, mate. It's like
yeah,
very
tangent.
very slight tangent, but I think it's really important to understand like whatever you're doing right now, you probably won't be doing forever. So it might be that you do create a constraint for a short period of time just to like help you get like I don't know, get started, or like say go just to like rather than just throwing someone in and being like, okay, you just get like go and do it, and like, okay, let's just create a few constraints here or there, and same with like calories. Like I think a lot of people think like they need to be in a deficit forever. It's like it's okay to do something that's a bit unsustainable for a short period of time if you know it's unsustainable and you're planning for something off the back of that. Um, where like and I think a lot of people kind of miss that they like feel like they're being sort of restricted, so they don't kind of don't want to do it because they think it's going to be like that forever. It's like you're not meant to be in a calorie deficit forever. If you like, yes, if you got like a lot of weight to drop, you might have a period where you
Hunger.
drop some weight, go back to maintenance, drop a bit more, go back to maintenance, or like you might just like drop and then hold for a period. But it's like you'll never be in a deficit for like forever. Like that should never be the goal. So
Right.
all of this stuff, like yeah, like the principles will last through, but the methods that you choose at any one time are probably only going to be for a short period whilst you're maybe trying to achieve something specific, and then you go back to doing what you're doing before. And it ties into sort of what we said before about like the dinner switch approach. Like
Hmm.
we want to have like the base habits all of the time, so that like we're fueling ourselves, we're getting enough protein in, like all of that good stuff. But then there might be certain times where you dial things up, you track some stuff, like you track things a bit more, you put a few constraints in place whilst you're maybe trying to like you're trying to prioritize this certain outcome, and then you might like turn that dinner switch back down.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, everything's a tool. It's how you use it, when you use it, it's knowing when to use it, knowing how to use it. That's what everything is, really. Food or tools. Again, not to simplify it, but that's a good way of looking at it. Is that exercise are tools, programs are tools, certain recovery protocols are tools. Everything is okay. What do you need at this moment in time, and do you have that in your toolkit? And do you know when to take it out, when to put it back? I think that's the best way of kind of encapsulating everything when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to training, all those things. So those were our 5 points. So we've got the good and bad foods, the morality of foods. We've got the big rocks, so that's the calories, protein, and then fiber slash vegetables, fruit and vegetables. My ear just started ringing really randomly there. Number three, build awareness. There's a tangent for you. Number four, processed versus unprocessed, and then number five, finding the path that works for you. So hopefully, you've got something from this episode. Again, nutrition is one of those things that we will no doubtedly touch upon multiple times in different ways when it comes to for this podcast. But yeah, as I said, hopefully those have given you a good place to start when it comes to nutrition. Tom, is that everything we need to talk about in this episode? I
I
failed
think
to make
so.
you laugh that much. I failed to make you laugh.
I think you've done okay, mate. I think we started these podcasts with obviously like we wanted like 5 points. We're like, oh yeah, we'll maybe be able to like condense things and keep it at, like as short and sweet as possible. We've been recording for like over an hour now.
The point.
Um,
That's the point. Like,
yeah,
whenever we were talking about this, I wanted it to be a more free flowing conversation rather than this extremely unitarian. Unitarian, is that the right word? Like just structured podcast. This is we're gonna forget things. We're gonna mess things up a little bit, but that's the point. We're not trying to be perfect here. Similarly, that you should not be trying to be perfect with nutrition, and hopefully these 5 points have helped you realize that yourself. With that,
exactly.
if you like the podcast, please share it. If you can share it on your stories, or if you can leave a review, anything like that really, really helps us. Other than that, we will see you in the next one. Have a good one.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.